new global talk show, Newstellers. Let's meet our panel. World-famous soccer player David Beckham's new tattoo is getting thousands of comments on social media. So there are increasing fans of the film Minions, not only among children, but also grown-ups as well, including myself. And Beckham's daughter Harper turned out to be one of those fans. So Beckham added a fake tattoo of her favourite character, one of the yellow henchmen, from the film Minions to his tattoo collection, showing his love for his little girl. Very sweet indeed. Have you guys watched the film Minions? Did you enjoy it?
Not yet.
No one's watched it?
Not yet.
Because I saw it. I mean, it was not as sophisticated as Inside Out, though. But I thought it was very, very cute. The way they banana.
Was it good enough to make a tattoo of a minion for yourself?
I'm not sure. Perhaps. They are very cute characters. But Beckham came off as this doting father who would do anything for his daughter. But perhaps he was just a fan of the Minions himself. They seem to be pretty popular among adults, perhaps not our panel here. But I went to Chamjil recently and they had like a display. There were some people dressed up as the Minions characters and they were pretty popular. Well, who are your favourite characters then?
I am a big Batman fan.
Okay.
Although I kind of...
And I can see you
I
brought in your little friend today.
Now I have to say, this was given to me as a gift, so I didn't buy this myself.
Sure.
Oh, come on, John. Come clean.
And also, I kind of object to the Kidult title because I think Batman's quite serious in his own way, especially in some interpretations of the character. There's a lot of sort of actually content that's not really suitable for children that I would never show my son or daughter if I had one. But yeah, I have a bit of a soft spot, if that's the right word, for Batman. I think he's just a really fun character and a lot of the movies and comics are really fun.
Okay, how about the rest of you?
There are other contents that they are cartoons and they are not for kids that I like. For example, this movie called Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi, that I would recommend it also for kids because it gives you a very nice knowledge of the history of Iran and how the people suffered this development of the revolution and stuff. And out of that, I don't think, well, The Simpsons maybe you guys like
well,
The Simpsons.
The Simpsons is my go-to thing, and the interesting thing to me is like when I was a kid, I was really into like I've been watching The Simpsons for probably like 2/3 of my life. So I say The Simpsons is like a rare kind of form of entertainment that like does appeal to children. But like if you watch it with the eyes of an adult, there's all kinds of like underlying and like subtle humor.
And for me, I'm a huge fan of Japanese animation genius Hayao Miyazaki. And other than that, I have to confess, I still play retro video games from the 80s, like the Nintendo games.
Right.
And I even now, I don't enjoy the new video games, but I really enjoy playing the old Super Mario or the old Castlevania, and I still do up to today.
Okay. Well, as you may have noticed, we're talking about kidults today. In Korea, people used to think it was a bit childish to be into toys and cartoon characters, saying that they should act their age, but we'll be talking and seeing if that's still the case today. Our title is Nostalgia Leads to Boom in Kidult Market. So there was a Kidult fair that took place recently in Busan from the 13th to the 16th, and 80% of the visitors were male and in their 20s to 40s. What exactly do you think a Kidult is? What's your own definition of it?
I guess maybe I would define kidult as someone who, in terms of their age, in terms of like how old they are an adult, but still wants to like maintain some connection to their childhood and still wants to like enjoy the innocence and the wonderment that comes with childhood. Because I think in childhood, like when we experience certain things for the first time, that's an emotionally intense experience that like we can never really replicate as adults.
Indeed.
It never happens to you again. So
I think Kidult is just a very, very light version of something called the Peter Pan syndrome, which is, I mean, it's not officially recognized as a disease, but it's a psychological condition in which the adult, usually men, stay emotionally at the children level,
Right.
and their adult life is similar to a children level. And the best example of Peter Pan syndrome suffering people is Michael Jackson, who used to live in what he called Neverland.
Right.
It was this huge amusement park, and he was trying to claim the childhood he never had. But kidults are maybe a very light version of this Peter Pan syndrome.
Okay. So let's move on to the news briefing section now. Could you guys share any stories about kidults around the world?
Yeah, one interesting story I read was about Chiba man.
Okay.
In the city of Chiba in Japan, there's this 41-year-old man who is periodically seen driving around Japan dressed as Batman. And he
In his Batmobile?
On his Batpod, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And he goes around just sort of acting the part. And I saw an interview with him on the BBC, and basically he started doing this after the Fukushima disaster and earthquake. And he basically just said that he wanted to bring smiles to people, and he's been doing this the last few years now, and it doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. He seems to be making people smile, which is nice.
Very fascinating.
Well,
Any
I can talk about this really impressive story of these two guys, one Romanian and one Australian. They joined like 500,000 Lego pieces worth $60,000, and they built a real car, but the car was propelled by air. It didn't even need fuel. It could go like 20 miles per hour, and they could really drive the car, and it was really, really impressive. I mean, it's something that kidults, that they are really into this kind of Lego thing. That is one of the star products of kidults that they can achieve. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, I read this story about a hotel in Florida that's like a Legoland, Lego-themed hotel. And like you can stay in a room that has a particular Lego theme. Like maybe you could stay in the jungle or a castle, and like while you're in your room, you can build it. And obviously, this is something that's directed to adults. Like kids can't afford to go, get a room in a hotel. I mean, I guess there are families, but like, I think this hotel's main clients are grown-ups who just want to play for the weekend. Like maybe they don't want to buy all this Lego and like have it in their house and have people see it when they come over. But a guy that I went to high school with is actually Canada's Lego Grandmaster. He won.
Wow.
They had this like nationwide competition of like who was the awesomest Lego building person, and he won. Like among a lot of people, it was a pretty impressive achievement.
Yeah, something I read in the news last year in Korea. It was about McDonald's selling like Super Mario figures, like Luigi, Mario, Princess Peach. And this was extremely popular. People, like adults, not kids, adults were lining up outside of the McDonald's to buy the Happy Meal. I'm not even sure they were having the tiny fries and the tiny Coca-Cola. And there were, some of them were selling it after that online. And even though the Happy Meal cost only 3,000 won, we could sell 10,000 won, the little figures, Super Mario figures. And in 3 days, McDonald's was out of all these characters.
Fascinating. And a nice little profit, it seems.
Yeah.
We've been talking about mostly male kidults, but it seems that the kidult trend was actually kicked off by females. So I've got a couple of stories to share with you today. There was recently a Barbie convention in Virginia. I believe they've been meeting for quite a few years now. So hundreds of ladies, they come dressed head to toe as Barbies. They bring their limited edition Barbie dolls and compare like the different careers that Barbie has. And there was also a girl from the UAE who has a soft toy collection of over 900 dolls. Her collection's valued at about 81,000 US dollars, and she shelled out $1,500 for the most expensive one. She is also 30 years old, same age as me, so not quite sure what's going on there, but whatever floats. I should. So we've been talking about the kidult boom across the world, and on top of that, the kidult culture has actually had quite a big impact on the media and entertainment industries as well. So can you think of any characters or animations or products that have been targeted towards grown-ups as well as kids?
I think the movie Inside Out, which is done very well this summer, is a really interesting film that's marketed to, like a lot of Pixar and Disney animations, it's meant to, perhaps inspire children to want to take their parents to the theater, and to buy them toys. But it's also meant to kind of be entertaining for grown-ups also. It's the story of a young girl who moves from the Midwest to San Francisco, and it sort of takes place inside her brain. And these like 5 emotions, like anger, disgust, and joy, and a few others, kind of argue amongst themselves as to how she should handle this difficult transition to living in a new place. You know, anybody, you know, we've all had to move to a new place in our lives. It can be very difficult, especially when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And so I think that film resonates with people because it's a sort of a close-up look at the varying and conflicting emotions that accompany such a difficult move.
It was pretty philosophical as well. It made you really think about, you know, your old memories. And I cried my eyes out. I don't know about you guys.
I think the current craze with comic book movies is a good example of this, especially Marvel. Marvel has made an absolute fortune. They're a comic book company. They've made an absolute fortune by producing these films based on the characters, and they've intertwined all the films so they all sort of cross over, have the same characters. And of course, a lot of the people who go to see them are children, but there's also a very large contingent, certainly of teenagers, young adults, and even people who are quite a bit older, you know, maybe 30s, 40s and up, who read The Avengers when they were a kid or read Batman or whatever. And people, you know, want to see these characters brought to life with $500 million behind it or whatever. So, I mean, there's obviously a really big demand for this because those films have made an insane amount of money and will continue to for the next decade, I'm sure, at least.
So it's a definitely good market to tap, isn't it?
Yeah.
In Korea, we see as well characters being developed with adult target in mind. The one I can think recently, the 2 characters that are very successful are Lava, you know, like red and yellow, these 2 little lava where they have like crazy adventures in the sewage. It's usually between 1 or 3 minutes. It's very short episodes that are screened in the subway or in the public transportation in Seoul. And this became very successful. There is more than 700 merchandising products now.
Oh, wow.
And for adults, we can have a laptop case with lava. And actually, they're not the first characters in Korea developed with kidults in mind. I don't know if you remember Mashimaro, which was a very nasty rabbit who enjoys toilet humor. That was very popular a couple of years ago.
I would like to quote these examples of irreverent and sarcastic cartoons like The Simpsons, like Steven said before, or South Park or Futurama. Another example is Shin-chan. I didn't remember the name, Shin-chan. I think that Japanese animation is very nice for children. They really laugh with the cartoon, and also some adults enjoy it because it's kind of sarcastic and funny in some way, and it's a stupid sense of humor that can be for everybody.
Shin-chan?
Shin-chan.
Is that Dragon Ball? No.
No, you don't know Shin-chan?
Oh, Jangu, apparently.
Changu.
You call it
So apparently in Korean, he's called Jangu.
Changu.
Didn't come to
So-
France.
But did you
I
know it?
definitely know what you're talking about,
Okay.
yeah. Lots of adult humor there. And in Korea recently, we've had quite a few pop-up stores with the Kakao and Line characters. I don't know if you've been to those
Yeah,
stores.
I've been to 2 of them actually.
Oh, you have? Out of choice, or?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question. There's a Line store in Hongdae, and there's one in Shinsa too, or Garusugil. And just to explain briefly, Line is a messaging app, kind of like Kakao Talk. It comes from Japan.
Yeah.
And basically these stores just sell merchandise related to the characters that you can use in the emoticons and the other characters that are in the wallpaper and stuff that come with the app. And they seem to be doing a roaring trade. When I was there, it was full of pretty much just young women, almost exclusively, just sort of saying how cute everything was, like repeatedly, really loudly. So yeah, it seems to be a very savvy business move because
Indeed.
everyone uses these apps on their phones, so they're constantly reminded of these characters, and people want to put them on their shelf or whatever as well.
Speaking of offline stores, we visited one in Ilsan recently. So let's take a look at this interview.
아이의 감성을 가진 성인 어른들이 함께 할 수 있는 어른들의 놀이터로서 드론, 레고, 피규어, 건담, 3D 프린터, 고가의 음향기기 등 다양한 상품을 직접 눈으로 확인하시고 체험하실 수 있는 그런 체험형 매장입니다. 최근 고객님들께서는 피규어나 드론 상품에 대한 관심도가 매우 높습니다. 피규어의 경우 20, 30대 젊은 층의 고객님들께서는 최근 유행하던 아이언맨, 어벤져스 시리즈를 선호하시며 40, 50대 고객님들께서는 과거에 유행하던 배트맨, E.T. 이런 상품들에 대한 선호도가 매우 높습니다. 해외 시장의 규모에 비해 국내 시장의 규모는 많이 열악한 것으로 알고 있습니다. 하지만 최근 키덜트 문화의 열풍으로 인해서 많은 매니아가 형성되었고 과거에 부정적이었었던 이미지가 많이 개선되었습니다. 따라서 앞으로는 이 키덜트 문화 상품들에 대한 전망은 매우 밝다고 생각합니다.
So that was the electro market where you can shop for the latest electronics as well as Kidult products. John, it looks like you're in the 40s to 50s demographic with your obsession with Batman.
Yeah, plenty of company.
So as we saw in the interview, the Kidult market is expanding pretty rapidly in Korea. But it's not just Korea. It's already pretty large around the world. So let's take a look at this chart, looking at the size of the Kidult markets in other countries. The US has one of the biggest Kidult markets in the world, over $11 billion, and Japan's is over $5 billion. In case of Korea, the current market was reported to be worth over $0.4 billion. So while Korea's Kidult market is still small compared to the US, but it's definitely showing a steady growth. What is behind such big growth, do you think? Do you think it will get to the point where it's as big as the US and Japan?
Well, I think, the modern idea of consumer capitalism is essentially to buy things you don't really need. Mm-hmm. And even like when we talk about things that we need nowadays, the definition is so broad. I need this and that, but you don't really need it. You just, you want it, or it gives you some pleasure, or it makes things a little bit more convenient. And so, if people have this nostalgia for the past or this desire to relive aspects of their childhood, it's just sort of inevitable that they're going to spend some amount of money doing that. And there might be extreme cases where people spend huge sums, but for most people, they can afford to spend a small amount on entertainment or leisure. And just one facet of that for some people will be Kidult-related activities.
Okay.
And also there is a big marketing effort from the companies to target adults, because when you do some products or content for children, you target children, but you depend on their parents to buy the things for them, to buy the products or the content for them.
Yeah.
But if you target the adults directly, you know that those adults, they have money and they can buy the content. So the companies know it, and the companies made in the last decades a lot of efforts to target directly those adults and to expand their market and to sell more products.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors that are behind the rise of kidults. I mean, one might be that in countries like Korea and Japan in particular, the birth rate is low. So, I mean, there just are fewer children. So, like, if as a company you want to really expand your business, it might be a matter of necessity to market to adults. But again, I also just think that like wanting to do things that are normally associated with childhood is a response to the stress of adult life and like wanting to forget the things that trouble you on a daily basis. But also, I mean, I said this on an earlier episode. This might also be related to like things that adults had normally been a lot more passionate about, like music and literature, are just kind of less important than they used to be. I mean, like the rise of the internet has led to all kinds of distractions. And there are fewer people who tend to seriously engage with, new novels and, new recordings by music artists. So this might be, like one place that our attention is going instead of like the other places that it had primarily been in the past.
Good points.
And I think one of the reasons of this growth is that the commercial appeal of these products is so strong. Nothing can beat that. We live in difficult times. We live in a time of global warming, of rising inequality. And anything that can remind us our childhood when we had no worry, we were kids. There is this nostalgia appeal is so strong. I think it's very easy for any company to tap into that appeal.
Okay. We've touched upon some of the social impacts of the rising kidult culture. Let me share with you now a quote from a book about this topic. Pat Kane laid out his argument about the positive aspects of the kidult culture in his book called The Play Ethic. He said, "Kidultery allows a full spectrum of play forms to be explored, and that's always a sign of the adaptive potentiation that makes for healthy humans. The new child-adult or adult-child is a positive trend. It suggests that we are keeping ourselves open in our mammalian complexity to all possibilities for adaptation and development." So Kane is arguing then that there are other effects of the kidult culture on the market other than the expansion that we've talked about. What do you think some of these effects might be?
I think there must be some positive effects, of course, and one of them it should be that you can get closer to your children. When you have a family and you have your children, you're a kidult. If you really like Disney movies and Pixar movies and characters and cartoons and toys, probably you enjoy much more with your children, and you can share that with them. It's a way to get closer to them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the person who wrote that, like, it puts a very positive spin on it. I mean, like, you could also argue, I mean, like, I'm not an expert in this field, I don't really know, but like, you can also argue that this is not like a new adaptation. This is a kind of regression. Like, this is like people getting to a certain point and saying like, nope, adulthood is scary, like, I'm going back.
Okay.
So I'm not ready to interpret this in such like positive terms just yet.
But Stephen, I think what he's trying to say is that playing and enjoying to play is really a human thing. It's from the history of humanity. Human adults enjoy playing. And recently I was reading this column in the Huffington Post by a writer who was saying like, oh, it's perfectly, we shouldn't be ashamed of being a kidult. And the writer was even using scientific studies by Professor Beatrice Luna, I think it was a Canadian professor, who showed that the brain is still plastic, it still can change until you become 25. Basically, the article was saying that if you avoid responsibility for a long time, then your brain, like literally, physically stay in a state of childhood or like teenage for a longer time. And
maybe that's my problem then.
Your brain. And she was explaining, oh, it can be good because of if you keep such like teenage kind of a brain, you can be more creative, you can release stress more easily. I mean, you can find people try to defend this trend.
I think my question as well would be, what do we mean by kidult? Because the way the author frames it is in the terms that we've been describing, talking about things that are associated with childhood, but there's a lot of ways to be creative. I mean, adulthood contains lots of opportunities to be creative in, quote unquote, serious ways as well. I mean, art is creative, reading stimulates your brain in certain ways. So I'm not sure if it has to be sort of focused at things that are associated with children. Is that a sort of a prerequisite of stimulating our minds? I mean, I don't know, but I would be skeptical.
So there are inevitable problems that come attached with this kidult industry. But I think the fact that it has become such a large market reflects kind of more of an open culture these days. People are more willing to accept people's individuality, which I think.
Well, I think people used to like identify much more strongly with like what their hobbies were. Like when we were kids, it was like if you listened to rap music, you were the rap person. If you listened to rock music, you were the rock person. If you were into sports, you were the sports person. And I think we've pushed beyond a lot of those like narrowly defined identities. And like now you can be a kid and you can be into things that are maybe, thought of as being for grown-ups in some cases. And you can be a grown-up and you can be into things that are thought of as being for kids. But with the sort of like iTunesization of culture, like almost everybody listens to all different kinds of music. And so I think that's a positive thing, that like maybe we're not so like caught up in like traditional identities.
Okay, so less segregation overall, hopefully. All right, well, let's wrap up with our final headlines then. Would anyone like to start?
I can start. I would say, keep kidulting as a hobby, but be a grown-up full-time.
Oh, okay. Very, very wise. I like that one.
My headline for such a story would be Kidults, the products of an infantilizing society.
Okay, very
Okay,
smart.
mine is, you're an adult, you may like cartoons, you may even like minions, but please don't tattoo a minion on your body.
Okay, some practical advice from Asa. And John?
Have fun, but keep your head.
Short and sweet. All right, thank you guys so much. We had a very entertaining talk today, but with some underlying deeper talk as well. So very, very interesting indeed. I will see you all next week, my lovely panel. And we will be back next week with a whole new global talk show, Newstellers. We will be open for any opinions or requests on our official website as well as our Facebook page.